Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing. Got used to the camera up there. Live show number 503. And I am your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us at the end of March, end of the first quarter. Be curious to see how you guys are feeling about what your first quarter was like. I think overall, from those I'm dealing with in conversations with and so forth and so on, it's a mixed bag. I mean, spring obviously had its value, but I think that was a residual of predetermined plans. I think there's a question mark as to anticipated travel plans for the remainder of this year, summer in particular. That is of question as to how well those numbers are going to hold on to. But I want to get to something that's related to both the current situation of how we're going to review the first quarter of 25 and also our expectations still remaining of 25 as it goes forward. And you've heard me iterate about this several times as to ways of approaching data, ways of looking at our data, and so forth. And I told you that ROI is great in context that it's best used on, which is value of the strategy of what we're doing. But if it's the first filter that everything gets pushed through, you lose context of opportunities that exist that should be considered, but because they don't hit the first hurdle of ROI on uncertainty principles and or growth value compared to production value, they sometimes get shelved or not implemented. I'm going to bring a little bit more detail to that as we talk a little bit further about it. But today's topic is about two of my dearer terms that I like to infuse into the conversation, which is pace and trend. Pace and trend. Two words you should use more. And I say that from not just using them in vernacular, but actually using them in data. They often don't get used enough. We tend to be fixated on what did we produce. It's a forensic look back on that's what we spent. This is what we made. This is how we should be happy or sad from it. That's an event. It's a slice of time. We're taking the context of our current perspective and measuring ROI. Or if we're looking in context of current performance, this is what we spent. This is what we're making. This is our ROI. That's fine for the relationship of understanding the value relationship that it represents, but from the context of just cost versus production. But it doesn't go into the line of actual success or failure of things. And we're going to go on both sides of that. One is to measure it as it is happening, and the other is to look critically as their performances of things and knowing if there's deltas of variances that are beginning to creep into a performance that has yet to impact the ROI relationship of what's going on. So what do I bring all of this context to? Well, I've often used the race car analogies, NASCARs and so forth, even though I'm not a huge fan of it. It is impressive to watch, but I'm not like a NASCAR fan as most people consider it to be. But we all know that races are won in our business world, or NASCAR, in a moment. Whoever crosses that finish line at that moment that the finish is indicated, okay, here's the line and I crossed it first. That moment, that ZMOT, zero motor transaction, that success of conversion, that ability to succeed is a momentary thing. That's what happened here. We beat everyone else that we're going to. They bought from us, not everybody else. That's fine. But to get to that moment, you have to have the opportunity of being in that moment. I often say that you can lead the race, a 500 lap race. You can lead the race for 499 laps, but if you don't, cross the finish line on the 500th, you don't win the race. That is milestone mentality. Milestones are moments of measurement. I'm leading the race halfway through. I'm leading the race on the last lap. That's all milestones. This is where we are when we look at it. What is our mid-month performance looking like? What is our first week performance? What is our campaign performance after the campaign's run for 10 days? These are milestones. We want to be here. When we say we run this campaign and at X date, we want to look at what it's doing on the criteria of ROI. Okay. Then on that X date, we look at it and say, is it performing at what level compared to what we would hope it to be? That's a milestone. Those are all good. Milestones are very important. Oftentimes, I say that we don't often imply a lot of milestones to our strategies. We tend to look at cumulative end result or chronological timestamps, end of the month, because we have to make a report. Why at the end of the month? Are we waiting that's miraculously from March 30th to 31st, to April 1st that the world is different. It's just chronologically different because of a naming convention to which month is which. It could have been 5 days beforehand that a campaign ended because of a event-driven thing, or a week ago it ended because of a transition in seasonal demand. Those are the milestones that we need to be more relevant to. Campaign cycles and durations of campaign runs and promotion runs. Those should be the milestones we measure, not just because it's one calendar month versus the next. That's all good that you have these milestones. But in order to understand what they impact, that they mean between those milestones, you need to understand pace and travel. Okay, pace and trend. Trend versus pace is about how things are shifting in the narrative of what you're measuring. Is your demand still at a pace that you had anticipated to be? And what do you mean by pace that I anticipated to be? If I start a new campaign, I don't know what the pace is. You can determine pace. Pace can be related to ROI if you want to go sort of a simple, familiar place to go to. Pace is if we get a 14-day campaign and we want to get $1,000 from this campaign in produced revenue, making simple numbers. Divide that by 14 days, you get about $70 a day that you need to produce on average per day to make your $1,000. Is it? Maybe your first few days was only $5 or $10, so it's off pace. It's not doing as much, but then the next weekend, it's 150 a day. So 5-7 days afterwards, you're quote at pace, because when you put all of those together, it's about what you would do at $70 a day. That averaging comes out about the same. That's a pace measurement. We're at pace for this. It seems like we're going to hit our goal if what happens, that when we're looking at it, is still continuing to happen through the duration of what we're measuring it for. Trend is about, is it going the way we have planned? For instance, going to the $1,000 example, it's going to take 10,000 people at a 10% conversion to get the 1,000. So, because everybody's at $1, let's just make that up. So, is the pace, is the trend of this where we think? Is it going where we expect it to go? Is it going consistently, going back to that $7 a day or $70 a day? You know, is the trend of that going in the same direction? Okay, so pace is the speed at which something's happening. Okay, our first 3 days were slow in pace. We only got $5 a day, but the next few days we were ahead of pace because we were $150 a day. So our trend is going the way we wanted it to go. Don't know if I made that more confusing by doing that, but pace is the speed at which something is happening. Trend is the shifting of ongoing narrative as to how it's happening. Again, $1,000 after 14 days. If you're just average day, you need $70 a day to produce. The first few days were only at $5 or $10 a day, so our pace was slow. It was off. And so to our trend at that point. But then after the next few extra days, 7 days in, the next few days were over pace. And so our trend went back in line again. That's the correlation of trend and pace. Why are these so important? Because they can be used to monitor if something's working towards what you think it is. Now, take that same example I just had, that in 14 days we're supposed to hit a certain marker. Okay. If we do it the ROI end of the month way, we won't know about it for another couple of weeks, that we started out good, our pace was good, trend was good, but then it fell off a cliff 2 weeks into the month. But we gave it the whole month before we did a milestone of looking at our performance ROI wise to realize that overall we were supposed to generate $2,000, 14 days of campaigns, and we only generated $1,100. And what we realized is that the first campaign went really well, but the second campaign fell flat. Its pace was off, its trend stayed off, and it never did what it was supposed to do. But because we didn't look at it for 2 weeks, because our milestone says we look at it at the end of the month, we didn't realize that 2 weeks ago we probably should have stopped the campaign after a few days when it didn't do the same performance that we thought it was supposed to do by a certain set time. In giving our example, that if it took 7 days to get back to pace on the first one, we gave the second campaign 7 days and it still didn't. And we saw nothing on the horizon that was going to change that. So we realized this campaign was not going to produce at the level we expected it to. Stop it, replace it, whatever. That comes from data that you can also use, which creates deltas, variations between performance and expectation. And do certain criteria with those: volume of traffic, value of conversion, volume of conversion. So value and volume of conversions, and those create deltas. So in the same scenario I had with it, we have first campaign launches, and the first 3 days were only $5 a day when we thought we would hopefully average $70 a day. We see that the delta, the traffic has gone up, but our conversion percentage and value conversion is way low. It's not there. So the delta of traffic is like, we're getting a lot of traffic, but we're not converting. Is that of concern right now? Well, we said we would give it a full 7-day cycle to include weekend bit demand. Okay, we went into this project thinking that weekday demand is soft, weekend demand is solid. These first few days of week demand are validating our point that it's a soft demand. But then the weekend exploded. Well, we saw that in our traffic, that we saw there was a lot of traffic, but not a lot of conversion. So we let it ride for the 7 days. After the 7 days, we saw that boom, all of a sudden conversions and value of conversions went up. Our delta is good. There's a huge delta variance. So wow, huge delta conversion. Now, as it went on, we began seeing that traffic was beginning to go down. The conversions were still high, and the value of the conversions were high, but the volume was beginning to taper down. That delta was beginning to show downward convert. That it wasn't getting the traffic it was getting before. Now, on our chart of milestones, we're still doing well. Positive growth, positive revenue, because numbers, as they're beginning to stack up, we're still on the positive side of things. We're still producing more than we're spending. We're still measuring ourselves as having a good, productive campaign, but we're beginning to see a crack in it. The traffic's beginning to diminish. It's not reducing yet our positiveness on this campaign, but it does, without enough volume, it will begin to affect the positiveness of the campaign. This is pace and trends indicators saying, hey, you should pay attention to this. Your pace is going down. Okay? Your trend is going to be affected by it. You're seeing something beginning to happen to this campaign's eventual arc of productivity. Now, you may let it run its course, and then when it reaches a certain threshold, you determine saying, well, when it finally gets down to a 4-to-1, or it gets below a certain conversion of 1.5 or something, we'll abandon or replace it with this campaign, the next version of the campaign. But we're going to ride the horse until it gets to the destination kind of mentality. That's fine. That's a decision we made because you're making aware of the data and say, look, it's still got some tread on the tire. A lot of analogies today. We're going to get some more mileage out of it. So we're going to let it run a little bit longer. We don't need to replace it with just boom, bump it up again kind of thing. But we're going to let it work its way down to just to the point where it's almost going to go on the negative force. And then we're going to introduce the next campaign and move it up. That's where you begin to use pace and trend to see the indicators before they turn into the result that a milestone would reflect on. This mentality for our time in our 2025 is going to become very important. I don't know, for those that had the benefit of going to college or even in high school economics classes, I always used to belittle them out of ignorance, really, probably, and being cocky in college. That every economics scenario that was ever presented was always under the condition that if all things were kept constant, which they can't be, we're going to look at this one item of variance, which we can't do, to determine the causation and effects associated with it, which is not realistic. That was my contention. But what I was ignorant of was, being a kid, was that the only way that you could, in context, talk about things is to create this artificial microbubble, a slice in time that's frozen, and look at the pieces to it to determine if you were to change them, how they might change what you see as the outcome of them. This static slice of time relationship of understanding things is critical at looking how these things happen. My discussion of pace and trend about diminishing numbers and deltas associated with them and so forth is literally looking at a progressive in-time variation. But every time you look at it is like a snapshot of that moment in time that you're looking at it. When you accumulate enough of these snapshots, you begin to see a pattern of performance, which is the part as a kid I didn't realize in economics class, is that we're not just talking about doing this once. We're talking about doing this persistently at moments in time and then judging the differences between those moments in time for the few variations that we created. We're doing the same thing with our terms of pace and trend. We're looking at the idea of what we're doing. Is it functioning at a certain tempo? And is the trend still going in the direction that we thought that pace and tempo would drive us towards? That's the correlation of pace and trend. What you need to realize is that we're in a different economy. We're always in a different economy, but in this year of 2025, our 2025 economy is that we can't keep doing what we have historically done, expecting the same result from it. And it's the definition of insanity, correct? Doing the same thing over without even expecting a different result each time. Unfortunately, we as a industry, and we're not alone in this, tend to harbor on things that are persistently what they've done before, old school stuff, or not even old school. That's a derogatory to old school. It's when something works, we stick with it, and we are very hard pressed to acknowledge that it is no longer good for us to do this strategy. I like to give a perspective of this as looking at like Apple. In the early days, Apple cannibalized itself with the iPhone by destroying the iPad. It dominated the space with iPads. It had multiple variations, smalls, mediums. It had interfaces with screens and so forth. It wasn't a phone. It was the precursor to phones. And it crushed Sony's Walkman. It crushed all the other MP3 players, and there was just piles of them. Apple just did it better. And then they added little ways of watching TV on a little screen, and we still did it. I remember flying, holding the thing up to my eyes, going blind, trying to watch a movie that I was so proud I could load on this little handheld thing and watch a movie and not have to do whatever the plane wanted me to watch. Anyways, that was creative destruction. What creative destruction is, it's an economics concept that describes that the process in which new innovations replace the obsolescence of older innovations. We're probably running campaigns. Actually, I can say this most definitely. Almost always I find that they run the same campaigns they have been running since they made them, however many years ago they made them. And a lot of that goes to branded campaigns. Who we are, what we are, where we are. They haven't changed. They say the same thing. They do the same thing. The campaign structure is the same. Even any efforts of targeting them are the same. The only things that might change is how much money you spend on them. But pretty much somebody back in the annals of time went over and said comprehensively, these are all the terms that can be related to your property, and they're in one campaign and they're for your brand, and they get launched. And most of the tools that most agencies still use are based on those old ones. I always find it fascinating when people hear the laugh tracks in today's TV companies are actually audiences from the 50s that did the laugh tracks. They're the same laugh tracks. It's the same mentality. I see campaigns that are built by people generationally that the people currently using them have no idea who they were. Some of them actually were ones I built, and I came back and they're like, it's the same campaign I built. Yeah, well, isn't broke, don't fix it. Not always true. You need to always evaluate the performance of them with pace and trend to understand, okay, and milestone, as to whether or not there is something that needs to be changed about them. That's the first step. Is there an improvement or change to them that we should do and look at? Not just the modification of what budget we dedicate to them, but is it still as good as it was when we first built it? And sometimes they were built and they were self-fulfilling because they did better than what they were doing before it was built. They think that that's the best they can get from it when they only realize they tapped 1/10 of their true potential. And had they expanded on it more and not just been happy with what they settled for its production, they could have even done better. That constant self-evaluation is absolutely critical in your constant ad creation, campaign development strategies. Always evaluate and never take as gospel that a campaign, an ad group, an ad set, or ad types can't be improved upon. Just the nature of changing the ad content, the structure of the ads, the dynamic fields of the ads, the targeting of ads. There's so many knobs and switches and levers that you can pull and twist and change on everything all the time. Create labs where you try creating campaigns that are variant to what you're currently doing to see if they operate and perform differently. It is a never-ending process that you need to do. That's simply to ensure that what you're currently doing is doing the best that it can and better than what it may have done if you had left it alone. That's number one. But this creative destruction process, again, going back to Apple as an example, Apple now is almost the antithesis of what it was back then. It's struggling with its Siri program and its AI implementation. What was promised in June of last year still hasn't come through on the latest iterations, even when it was said to go on the iteration of 18.2, the update. Now it's 18.3, might be something different. It's still going to be less than what it was promised, on and on and on, to the point that they're changing chess pieces as to who's running the program right now. Vision Pro's dude is now going to be running the Siri program. They're trying to sort through what they're doing. They're not in that creative destruction mode before. We see it in other representations, and I know this is a terrible example given the current politics in the United States, but the SpaceX program, how was it able to advance so quickly over what had been traditionally Boeing and NASA and the programs that they did? It's because they blew rockets up. They knew that the rocket wasn't going to come back down. So they put into it everything they could tell about what happens when it doesn't come back down to know what better way to make sure it does come back down, compared to the bureaucracy of layers and so forth and so on that Boeing had to live under and NASA worked with to make sure that nothing went wrong until it was fully vetted to go. And so that it waited too long to do something simply because it had to ensure that nothing went wrong the first time that it did it. Meanwhile, SpaceX over there is blowing up rockets and learning fast from it. Now they can make a rocket land back on little chopsticks and things massive. Anyways, again, politically, probably not the best reference point to it, other than to say that this creative destruction process to destroy what was an older innovation to replace it with a newer innovation is about a process of just comparing it. It doesn't mandate that you must destroy something. It only says don't have to keep something just to keep it. You don't have to layer something on it compared to the idea that you might have to be able to replace it. This campaign structure of creative destruction is absolutely fundamentally needed at this point, because what worked before for how it worked isn't always the way it continues to work. And people think, well, there's nothing's changed about branding. Yes, everything has changed about branding. The relationship demographically to your brand, the idea of what your brand represents, your value proposition to things that have changed in your destination that didn't exist when you first set up the branding campaigns that now exist. Have you added those things into your branding campaign? That you're now near the new conference center that opened up, that you're now near the certain event venue or whatever. Those things always have to be infused into it. And if what you're doing no longer resonates to whom you're doing it for, the willingness to consider the replacement of that strategy with a different one, that creative destruction persona for that. I'll give you a good example. Last week, there was a thing in the news of what old is new. Abercrombie and Fitch, Banana Republic, the Old Navy. There's this thing going on in the United States that is kids now, because of social media, are going to the malls, and they're going to these stores to shop in person, mainly to socialize and to hang out and show that they're there and so forth. But all these old trendy brands from the 90s are now fresh again, in the sense that what's old is new. We say that as an analogy, but it's so very true. The idea that those fashions now are the new fashions. We're going to get bell bottoms back someday. At least I'm hoping, because I have a pair. Anyways, the idea that you have to have this creative destruction mentality is paramount to making sure that nothing is totally sacred because it's untouchable. That goes into your reporting processes, for goodness sakes. Sometimes reports are simply generated simply from the idea that it has always been done. People don't remember who asked for them or what the origin of it was. And when you ask them what they use it for, they tend not to. If anything, there's a number or a tab or a thing that you can't get caught not knowing, but it's not usable by anybody. But everybody, it's so familiar to everyone that that's the thing that they always have. And you question the report. Why do we have this report? Why is time being spent making this report? What's the report used for? Is there a better way that this report could be made, or should we just toss it out completely and replace it with one that is useful? These are the ways of approaching the usages of pace and trend and interpretive ways of data, deltas and variations to things, to have a more persistent awareness of how data can be helpful in our day-to-day decision process. Going back to the old versus new, going back to the NASCAR analogy, the models of the cars, the shapes of the cars that are running around the track now, they have no similarities to the cars that traveled around the track 10 years ago, mainly because models of cars change. Why did they change? Preferences changed. New innovations changed them. That they realize that certain shapes can perform better, certain things can be enhanced. The idea that you're always going to run around an old car because its performance is always at this certain level is great. But if the entire track is new and they've operated this level, even at the car's optimum performance that it ever was built for, to do as good as it ever did, is still far less than the base lowest level of all the newer stuff that's now running. Think of why military jets are, generation 4 and 5s, where they have all these things that they can do and fly back. Think about World War II planes. Progression of technology, progression of innovation has changed what used to be cutting edge then to what it is cutting edge now, which will be different than the cutting edge in the future. That progression of development is fundamental in our marketing strategies. How do we continue to be innovative with what we produce, understand the data that we're getting to know what changes we need to make, which pace and trend is a critical component of that, and then use it in a way that makes the change effective. So I think I hit on all the points I wanted to hit with that. Pace and trend, 2 words you should use more. I do hope your first quarter numbers are solid. I do hope that you are looking at good projections for second quarter and summer in particular. Love your feedback for it. You can always reach out to me at lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. If you have any comments, feedbacks, or suggestions, I answer each and every email for it and for the podcast, Hospitality Marketing Podcast. Also, our hospitality radio station, our hospitality TV station, the hospitality channel. You can find it on Roku, Google, Amazon, Apple, all smart TVs. It's actually an app as well on your iOS or Google Play. We do also do our simulcast on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter channels and pages throughout all of that. We are broadcasting to 209 countries, as a matter of fact. So the hospitality radio is hospitalityradio.com, or on your digital radio stations that you listen to, the Spotify's of the world and so forth are also there. So with that, my name is Lauren Gregg. I thank you for the privilege of your time and look forward to talking to you next week.